Welcome to the Empowered Wife podcast, where it's all about fixing your relationship without your man's conscious effort so that you feel desired and taken care of and special, even if your relationship feels completely hopeless. I'm Laura Doyle, and today I'm sharing what to do with your monster-in-law. When my guest Tiffany remarried after a divorce, she felt trapped between her young daughter and her husband, who just could not get along. She also couldn't understand why her husband would ask her opinion and then bicker with her when she gave it to him. She started to feel hopeless that this was ever going to be a happy family. But she made some discoveries and started some new practices. And today her husband is soft and tender with a strong desire to please her. She's going to tell us how she did that. And then I'll be giving out the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week award, which is a doozy. All that's coming up. But first, let's talk about what to do with your monster-in-law and how to get her to behave and give you the kind of help you want. Mother-in-laws can be pushy. Yours may think she knows better than you how to make a cup of tea, how to burp the baby, how to get the spot off the carpet, but it's your beverage, it's your baby, and your carpet, and nobody wants to be told how to do things. Sometimes it goes even further, and you get the impression that she just doesn't like you at all. In fact, you get the feeling she's rooting for you to fail. It's like she hates you, and you've never done anything to her except marry her son. It feels terrible. And as much as you'd like to put her in her place, you can't, because your husband insists she means well. You should try to be more understanding around her. Or maybe you've had your blow-ups with her and now things are tenser than ever. But you can't get your mother-in-law out of your life. So you're stuck with what feels like an enemy in the camp forever. Fortunately, you can solve this. Here are 3 steps to making your mother-in-law behave better. Step 1, find 5 good qualities about her. This step is the hardest because once you're feeling hurt by your mother-in-law, it's hard to see past that hurt to the fragile human who birthed your husband. But your mother-in-law has good qualities. Everyone does. And even she is part of everyone. Does she remember birthdays and anniversaries? Or has she bought presents for your baby? Or does she clean up after herself? Is she a good cook? Does she smell good? Does she let you stay at her home? If absolutely nothing comes to mind, why not start with this one? She raised a wonderful son. She's a good mom. I'm sure you could make a far longer list of her faults. But if you're anything like me, that would just cause you more pain. I admit that I don't know if I could have made a gratitude list about my mother-in-law years ago because I was sure she did not like me. She told my future husband not to drink out of the same water glass as me so he wouldn't get my germs. Harumph. I wanted to tell her that he was getting plenty of germs from me in other ways, but I kept quiet and rolled my eyes internally instead. I decided she meant that she didn't want me to touch her son. I gathered more evidence for this story at my wedding shower when, as I was opening one little negligee after another, I got to her gift, a full-length flannel nightie with long sleeves and a high neck. That was all the evidence I needed to become convinced that she had it out for me. I nurtured that grudge for 2 full years after my wedding until something completely unexpected happened. My mother-in-law died. I was sad for my husband, and I'm embarrassed to say I was relieved from myself, as if my adversary had fallen. And looking back 28 years later, I'm sad that I never got to know her. Today I can see that she was probably thinking past the wedding night when she picked that nightie. She must have wisely realized that negligees are not so comfortable for sleeping, and I would get plenty of those at my bridal shower. I now believe she wanted me to be warm and cozy for the coming winter. Even as I reflect on that, I get a little choked up thinking about what I missed because I never got to know her or benefit from her wisdom. She lived thousands of miles away, and I was too busy making her wrong in the short time we had together. Now that I've gotten to know her posthumously, I could see she was practical and considerate. She was resourceful, having raised 5 kids who became wonderful adults. And she loved her family. When I think about how reliably she sent me a birthday card every year and asked how my parents and siblings were, I realized she also loved me when I joined her family. I just couldn't see it at the time. Step number 2, find a mother-in-law fulfilling prophecy that serves you. What you focus on increases, and you may be telling yourself something negative about your mother-in-law, that she's controlling or overbearing or negative or selfish, and therefore you're experiencing the very thing you're focusing on. My mother-in-law fulfilling prophecy was that she didn't want me to touch her son. I gathered evidence and I made a case for it, and then I got to be right. But I didn't get to be dignified or happy or connected to my new family the way I would have liked to have been. Sophia felt the same way. Her mother-in-law's native tongue was Spanish, and English-speaking Sophia's mantra was that they couldn't communicate. So Sophia delivered messages through her bilingual husband instead of telling his mom directly. And once she started practicing the 6 intimacy skills and had her second baby, Sophia realized that going through her husband to communicate with her mother-in-law was no longer serving her. So she decided to change her mantra to, my mother-in-law and I communicate well. My mother-in-law and I communicate well. That was her new mantra. Sophia was gushing when she described how wonderful her mother-in-law is now. I drop off the boys with her for the weekend, she told me, and she takes wonderful care of them. When I dropped them off last time, I ended up staying 2 hours just to talk. I really enjoyed it. So clearly, we communicate well now. She got tears in her eyes, describing just how much she genuinely loves her husband's mom. What will your mantra be about your mother-in-law? That she's generous, that she's sensitive, that she's respectful, that she's so positive or so loving? Once you start gathering evidence for your new mother-in-law fulfilling prophecy, you might be surprised just how far it takes you. Step 3, find 3 reasons to thank her. And here's the next experiment to try if you want your mother-in-law to shape up. Kill her with kindness. Now that you're focused on both her good qualities and having the experience you want, look for 3 specific reasons to thank her. Refer back to your list of good qualities from step 1 for ideas. You might appreciate how generous she is, or how supportive of your family, or what a good cook. When you express your gratitude, you're also calling your mother-in-law to be her best self. You're speaking greatness into her. Here's another reason why this step is so powerful. Voicing the gratitude you came up with in step 1 brings your focus to that gratitude. Since what you focus on increases, you'll see even more reasons to be grateful for her. Really. Hearing yourself thank her will also help to erase resentment, because you can't be grateful and resentful at the same time. Feeling resentful is painful. It was not an attractive state for me either. Feeling grateful, on the other hand, is the best beauty cream that never came in a jar. Wearing gratitude-colored perspectacles could just transform your mother-in-law into a helpful, sweet, loving woman you actually enjoy spending time with. Don't say I didn't warn you. If you're wondering how to get started with fixing your relationship and making it shiny again, then you need a roadmap. Get 6 simple steps to follow that will set your relationship up for success. Discover 3 common mistakes that wives make trying to fix their relationship that just make things worse when you download my free Adored Wife Roadmap. You can do that at getcherished.com. Go to getcherished.com now to get your roadmap in minutes. When my guest Tiffany remarried after a divorce, she felt trapped between her young daughter and her husband, who just could not get along. She also couldn't understand why her husband would ask her opinion and then bicker with her when she gave it to him. She started to feel hopeless that this was ever going to be a happy family. But she made some discoveries, started some new practices, and today her husband is soft and tender with a strong desire to please her. She's going to tell us how she did that. Tiffany, thanks for coming on the Empowered Wife podcast. I appreciate you being here today.
Oh, you're welcome, Laura. I'm so delighted to be here.
So take us back to the beginning of your marriage. What was going on? What was happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, things were pretty good at the beginning, but I'd say maybe 9 months in, I started having some really bad difficulties with peace, not having any peace between my daughter and my husband. And we had had a long distance relationship. We lived like 9.5 hours apart during our courtship. So he only really got to come and visit my family once. And whenever he did come, he spent time with my daughter. She was 8 at the time. And they played card games together and they seemed to get along just fine. And I was like, okay, yeah, this is great. This is going to work. He's going to be a good dad for her. But then whenever I started to see this breakdown of the peace and the bickering between them, it made me second guess all of that. I was like, what happened? Why is this going on? I had so much hope that it would work out. And it felt out of my control. Like I'm very much a peacemaker by nature. And I felt like I had to mediate between them. Like I was caught in the middle of their fights a lot. And it was almost like a competition of who I loved more, because it was like if I sided with my husband, then I loved him more, or with my daughter, I loved her more, and they both felt it wasn't making peace whenever I would try to intervene. But I felt like I needed to, because I'd been a single mom for 2.5 to 3 years, and me and my daughter had always been really close. So of course, I known her whole life, so I felt like I had a good understanding of her. So whenever she would be getting attacked, was the phrase, I would want to step in to protect her and explain where she was coming from. And my husband definitely felt like that was us siding against him. And in retrospect, I see that he felt really disrespected. And he felt like I was making excuses for her, all that kind of painful stuff that comes along with being caught in the middle.
Yeah, I remember you also saying that he seemed so harsh. Like here you guys were girls and you had a certain culture. Tell me about
Right. Yeah, he grew up with 4 brothers. He was the oldest of all 4 of them. And they were all very rough and tumble. And it was the story, me and my daughter's story, that he just didn't know how to treat women. He didn't know how to treat girls. That was more like what I told myself. Whenever I told my daughter, I tried to talk to her to help her to be understanding with him. And I was like, he really didn't have training growing up on how to interact with girls. And so that was the story, was he was just harsh and bitter because of not having that knowledge.
So it sounds like there was a lot of stress and tension at your house. And so what were you trying to do to fix that?
Well, me and my husband are very similar. We're both introverts, and I came to understand him to a certain degree. And so whenever I would try to step in and mediate their fights, I would be like, Jaden, this is where he's coming from. And then I'd talk to my daughter and be like, this is where he's coming from. And try to get them to understand one another. And I just felt like there was no understanding. Like I understood her and I understood him, but they couldn't understand each other. Even whenever I tried to step in and be helpful and walk them through it, it just made things worse.
So were you thinking like, okay, maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe this was a mistake to form this family?
I did struggle with feelings like maybe I'd made a wrong choice. Like, I didn't give it enough time. They didn't get to spend enough time together before we got married. And he moved in to live with us to make sure that they were able to get along. That definitely ran through my mind a lot. And, I never thought about divorcing him, but I did feel like it would be easier if we would separate. Like I didn't want to end our marriage. I definitely didn't want to go through a divorce again after just a year or two of being married. And so I thought, if we can't be at peace, maybe we should just be apart.
Did you ever bring that up?
No, thankfully I didn't. I knew my husband well enough to know that he probably would have called my bluff. I knew that I really didn't want that. I mean, when you really ask yourself what you want, you just want peace. And I didn't feel like that was the right way to have peace. Whenever I was distraught and sad and desperate, I did think those things, but thankfully I held my tongue. I even had decent duct tape back then. I was like, all right, just give yourself until tomorrow, give yourself a day or two, see if you still have those feelings. They did usually go away, so I never actually acted on them, but was a reoccurring thing that I struggled with, feeling that way.
So you're kind of caught in this cycle of them fighting and the tension feeling really bad and stressful and trying to intervene and it's not working. And then thinking, what am I going to do? And then a few days later, it would get better and you'd be okay again. And then the whole thing would start up.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
fair to describe it that way?
Mm-hmm. I'd say the criticism was more like an everyday thing. Like it felt like almost everything my daughter would say or do, he would criticize. But it was just some days it was so bad, it was a blow up. But other days it was bearable.
Wow.
Yeah, that was the bad old days.
Yeah, because your inner mama bear was probably like, you leave my kid alone. Like, stop criticizing my daughter. So that had to be, pretty excruciating, I bet, to watch that going on and feeling powerless. Like there's nothing you can do. You love them both, and yet they were hurting each other. So that is a very stressful situation. So what happened?
Well, it wasn't a fight between them that led me to look for something better. It was a fight between me and my husband. And I remember, like we mentioned, I had been married before. And I saw my first marriage break down. And I was starting to see it again. Me and my husband were out on our deck and having some fight again. And I was struggling with the same feelings. A lot of what I was focusing on was I don't get enough attention and he's always on his devices or phone or something. And we were having that same fight. And he went in the house and I was out on the deck by myself. And I remembered having that fight with my first husband. And I was like, okay, this is the same deck, the same argument, a different man. So I realized that thing that I was the constant variable here. And I started really asking myself, what is it that's going on that's making this reality repeat for me? Because my second husband was completely different than my first. They were completely different personalities. So it wasn't the man, which is what I started to realize.
That's extraordinary because I think it takes a lot of humility and courage to kind of identify yourself as the constant in this unpleasant situation you were in. But so you kind of had this epiphany. It must have been painful.
Kind of. I have always been very much ferocious introvert. I'm constantly thinking about my thoughts and my feelings and very much growth mindset. And I read a lot of self-help books my whole life. So I was kind of already used to constantly asking myself, what's going on? You know, how can I be better? How can I do better? So I wouldn't so much say it was painful. It was just kind of my norm. But this was something I couldn't figure out.
Yes, but okay, so I love this. So you already had been trained or trained yourself to kind of look at yourself when there was a conflict outside of you. What am I doing? How am I contributing to this breakdown? So I love that. So what did you do when you realized there was the same scenario happening again?
Well, I definitely realized that a big part of it was me, and there were some things that I already was recognizing that I was controlling that I shouldn't control. But I realized I was so fearful. I didn't see a way to not control those aspects of our relationship. I came out of my first marriage with a lot of trust issues. And I was like, okay, well, I know I'm doing these things because I don't trust him because of what I went through with the first breakdown. But I felt just hopeless. Like, I don't think I can trust him. I don't think I can resist doing these controlling things because, like, I didn't feel like mentally I could handle it.
Like with me, I remember my counselor saying, just stop being so controlling. And I was like, how is that going to happen? So this is kind of a conversation you're having with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, Tiffany, stop being so controlling. You're like, but I don't know how to do that. I can't
Mm-hmm.
do that.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Too hard. It's too scary.
Too hard, too scary, too overwhelming. So what did you do? How'd you get out of that?
Well, the turning point was we had started to work together in the same office, and we would quibble on the way to work a lot, and we had a disagreement on the way to work, and I was wanting him to treat me different. I was wanting him to treat me with compassion. I was wanting him to understand why I said and did the things I did, And so I started searching online for a meme that would, about your husband not loving your wife and like how much pain it causes the wife. I wanted to do a jab with it. But instead, I came upon your blog article of why is my husband not affectionate? And that hit home. It was like exactly what I needed. Because I said, that's it. It's the affection, it's the tenderness, it's the love that I'm dying to have. And that article was just amazingly eye-opening for me. Whenever you show up respectful, this is what you look like. And it was like a picture of a beautiful woman and how that's so attracting to a man. But then this is what you look like when you're disrespectful. And it was a woman whose hair was all crazy and she's screaming. And, that's what it was feeling like was happening. Like, I felt like he used to think I was beautiful and he called me his princess. But then it was feeling like he's not attracted to me. He doesn't care about me. He doesn't love me. And it's not that I felt like I was so unlovable. So I was trying to understand why it was happening. And that article really, like, I immediately started signing up for everything to try to learn more.
Like, I'm in.
This is the answer.
So it gave you some hope that there was a way out. Like you were feeling like, I see that I'm controlling, but I can't change it. And this article, I feel like maybe I can change it.
Yeah, because I had a lot of responsibility for myself. I knew that it's up to me to be better and to do better. But that was what I struggled with. Like, I don't know how. I don't really exactly know what I'm doing wrong or how to change what I'm doing wrong. And so I was like, okay, this can finally help me to see what changes I need to make and give me a plan on how to make them and give me support for making them.
So you never did get to send that meme about how painful it was when your husband loved his wife? Okay.
Thankfully, after I found that article of yours, I disregarded the meme idea.
It's like, how to change a heart about that. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. And so what did you sign up for? You said you started signing up for things right away. So
I first got the roadmap, I think you call it.
Yeah.
So I signed up for the roadmap.
Yeah.
And I went through all of those things. And I got your book. I started reading that immediately. And in the book, you mentioned coach training. If you want to take your relationship to the next level, you can sign up to be a relationship coach. And I felt like it really resounded with me. I love the idea of working with people. Like I said, I've always been a peacemaker naturally and a mediator. People feel comfortable talking to me typically. So I thought this is something I might really like to do that would be fulfilling. And your vision to end world divorce, I had been through divorce and I greatly regretted it. And I thought this is something I could really get behind. And something that would be, it was a vision that I definitely agreed with. So I signed up for coach training from the little reference that was in your book, Empowered Wife.
Wow. And what did you start doing differently in your relationship than what you'd been doing?
Well, definitely I had to implement respect first and foremost. Well, no, I take that back. Self-care. Because I understood I saw how the answer to my trust issues was self-care. The things that I do to control him because I don't trust him, the answer lied in self-care. That's how you have the strength to get through the fear, is making sure that your cup is filled. Or if there's something happening and you feel the desire to control, that means you probably need to step back and go do some self-care because you're depleted. So as far as that goes, self-care was definitely the first one I had to do. And then respect, for sure. Part of respect was not being controlling. Part of respect was staying off his paper. So that's how self-care played into that. And then also I tried to respect his thinking more with whatever you think. That was one that I started out with immediately. Whenever he'd ask me questions, I'd say, whatever you think. And it drove him crazy because it wasn't what he was used to, you know. But It was funny. He was filling out this I was filling out this quiz on Facebook. And you're supposed to ask your mate these questions, like what's my favorite ice cream and stuff. And one of the questions was, what do I say most often? And he said, whatever you think.
Oh,
So I was like, well, apparently I'm doing that part fine.
so you got some validation that you were showing up differently in your relationship, but he wasn't responding very well to that, whatever you think.
Yeah, that's a delicate dance I've learned from what I've learned in the training, that your husband, he wants to know your desires because he wants to please you. But it was hard to balance that with letting go of control, relinquishing control. Because he would ask me these questions, and the tricky part was, understanding, is this my desire he's actually wanting to know, or is this something I should defer to his thinking with? So that was one of the keys there to try to figure that out.
So sometimes it sounds like sometimes you were saying whatever you think when he was trying to find out, like, how can I make Tiffany happy right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever you think. And then he'd get mad about that or kind of irritated or.
Yeah, I'd say irritated.
Okay. Yeah.
Like he would keep pressing me for an answer. And I was like, okay, but for the skills, I'm not supposed to be controlling. So.
Right. And yet he needs to know your desire, right? So that's the delicate dance that you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, and it's true when especially when you're first learning something, right? You're just like, okay, I'm just going to say whatever you think every time so that I can be sure that I'm not controlling. I'm not jumping onto his paper. It sounds like you were erring on the side of.
Yeah, that's been one of the hardest skills for me to implement, is honoring my desires, because I was so devoted to my daughter whenever she was little. And then being a single mom too for a few years, you get taught, you get trained that you have to push yourself and your needs and your desires aside for what's best for the people that you love. So that was it is still a habit that I have to struggle with, being like, okay, it's okay for me to ask myself what I need in this moment.
Well, Tiffany, I think that's such a great point, because I do think it's almost part of maternal instinct, isn't it? To put aside your own needs, even metaphors of the physical body, right? Like if you're nursing a baby and you're malnourished yourself, the baby's going to get all the nutrition and the mom will go without so that the baby gets it. And I think that's kind of I remember hearing that and thinking, what a metaphor for kind of the spiritual side of mothering too, right? And especially as a single mom. So it makes sense that was your training. How did you start to get in touch with what your desires were?
Well, during times of self-care, I would think about that a lot. And I would write about it in a journal. You had some really great advice in the Empowered Wife book, that you keep a list of your desires to keep your finger on the pulse of what you want, I think is how you put it. And I had to start doing that, because otherwise I would not focus on them. I would not give them the time of day. And it helped me to become more conscious of them. That way I could share them with my husband too, whenever he would ask.
So does he still get irritated when you say whatever you think, or how's that go now?
No, it goes a lot better, because usually I'm getting better at knowing when he's asking whatever you think for something that I need to trust his judgment on. And whenever he's asking whatever you think, whenever He just wants to know whether I want hamburgers or tacos for dinner,
What a great distinction. I love that. That makes a lot of sense. It can be confusing at first, and it sounds like it's something you've practiced and gotten better at. And then what about the relationship between your husband and your daughter?
Mm-hmm. So that was a project I decided to undertake whenever I started training to become a coach. Was I started sharing some of the information with her. And she was young and she just wanted to play Minecraft, so she didn't see the value in it. But I told her, I said, listen, you're quite likely someday going to get married. And I can't tell you how much I wish I knew these things before I got married. I said, you don't want to wait until your marriage is unhappy and breaks down before you start learning the right way to show up as a wife. And I think since her seeing her parents split up, it meant a lot to her. She's like, she's right. Mommy and daddy aren't together anymore. And if mommy's saying this is important, make sure that doesn't happen to me, then I'm going to take it seriously. And so I wrote, and I taped it up inside her closet door, that respect means you don't criticize, contradict, or control a man, that you trust his thinking. And I said, this is what we have to try to bring to Gio. He's not your husband, but it's what we have to show up as to make him feel respected. And the more he feels respected, the more love and tenderness he's going to have for us. I told her about how respect was like oxygen for men. We started using some SFPs.
That's right. I remember that was a big part of your story. You started using spouse fulfilling prophecies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, the best one that we found was, you always see the best in me. I love, or I appreciate how you always see the best in me. Because in moments whenever we are sensing criticism or feeling criticized, that's what we choose to focus on. And I know in my coach training, as it went along, I shared that a lot with the groups about how in the evenings I would express gratitude to my husband too. Whenever I would focus on him seeing the best in me, I would express the gratitudes for it in the evenings as we were going to bed. And those two things together is what really helps create change.
Wow. So what is it like now at your house?
He's a lot more loving. Like one time, the way I could really tell that it was working was one time he actually apologized to my daughter for the way he spoke to her. He'd said something, I don't remember exactly what the words were, but something that was kind of harsh. But we didn't accuse him of being harsh. He had time to think about it. And he came to her and he apologized later for the way that he spoke to her.
Wow.
And I was thinking, I never would have expected him to apologize to anyone, let alone her.
So that wasn't happening before?
No.
When you were intervening or trying to explain to both of them about the other one, he wasn't apologizing for her.
Right. It was just triggering defensiveness from him. And whenever he was feeling attacked, of course, you never feel accountability for what you do whenever you're trying to defend yourself. But it's whenever the criticism stops that you can sit back and think, maybe I didn't show up as my best self then. Maybe that wasn't a nice thing to say, and we made room for him to come to those terms with that on his own.
Wow. So how did your daughter respond to that?
She definitely feels more, it helps her to be more determined to still use the skills, because it was a little bit difficult training her, because she would be at our house for 2 weeks and then be at her dad's for a week. She still spends quite a bit of time with him. So it's like during that week, she'd kind of forget things and get a little slack. So whenever she'd get back, I'd have to, all right, we need to get back on the boat with this. But she definitely likes the change. Like they're even saying whenever she's leaving, she'll say, I love you. They'll say, I love you to each other. And they'll give each other hugs before I tuck her in bed. Oh. And that's something that was just kind of like I'm me and you're you, and we'll just go about our own business. But now it's really starting to feel more like a family.
Oh, Tiffany, that must have been music to your ears for them to say that to each other. Like they have genuine affection. It's not just conflict between the two of them.
Yeah.
And then how about between you and your husband?
Yeah. So I see the sweetness and the softness in him now. I see all the ways in which he wants to please me, and how whenever I express my desires in the right way, he just steps right up to do them for me. And gratitude played a big part into that, because I realized that in my mind I was focusing on all the ways he was selfish, or all the ways that he was harsh. And so it's amazing how the skills train you to see what's there as well. There's good there too. There's no reason to want to give up and not be around this man. He loves you more than anything, and he wants to please you. You just kind of have to be open to it, to give him a chance. And so I can really see now, whenever I give him a chance, how much he is my hero. You learn to trigger that hero gene, and they show up with so much love for you whenever they feel like they can take care of you, whenever they feel like they're pleasing you. It's not just I do everything wrong all the time. I can actually do things right, and I want to do things right more and more every day.
So you see him feeling more successful, it sounds like.
Yeah, making me happy.
Yeah, making you happy. You're focused on how well he's doing with that, which is kind of a virtuous cycle. It sounds like he wants to do more. The more he feels that he's succeeding and pleasing you, and the more he's hearing your gratitude. Wow.
It's amazing how quickly things turn around whenever I clean up my side of the street. And then he's just right back. So I realize it's not him. It's not that he's a harsh man. It's that whenever I jab him, which every once in a while I do, I get depleted. I'll be on a long car ride and have to wait for hours at the dentist's office and get out of sorts because I didn't have time for self-care that day. But it's wonderful to be able to have the skills to realize, all right, I was depleted and I said something disrespectful. And it's not that he's harsh. It's that I wasn't showing up the way I wanted to show up. So I guess in that way, no, like the harsh man isn't really there anymore. He wants to live up to my vision for him. And he wants to be loving. That's how he really wants to be.
So he changed. Does it feel like he changed?
Yeah.
Okay, and I get that it was you. I mean, even you saying, well, I had to apologize for being disrespectful. Like, how hard was that to do? Especially the first, when you first started doing that.
I felt very awkward. I didn't ever really have trouble with saying I'm sorry. I've always been a big apologizer and wanting to own my mistakes. But I made the mistakes in the past of also expecting them to own up to their mistakes, and that would just continue arguments. Or also, I really found in experimenting with skills, it is so much more effective whenever you word it as, I apologize for being disrespectful for this. It meant so much more, because I'd said I'm sorry like a million times. He would say that doesn't mean anything to me. But whenever you say, I apologize for being disrespectful, for saying this to you, or being controlling about this, it just, he used to tell me in the past, in the bad old days, that apologies meant nothing to him, but those kind of apologies speak his language. They get through to him, and they make him, his feelings toward me change immediately.
Wow. So, and it sounds like it wasn't that hard to even get it out for you. Like it wasn't, you felt awkward, but I think a lot of women, yeah, there's somebody listening right now, like, I am not going to stroke his ego like that. Like, why should I be the one to apologize for being disrespectful first? So how did you overcome that hurdle?
I had to use pretty much all of the skills in all of these changes. The one that helped me most with that was learning how much power a woman has in a relationship. And there were times during my training that I felt that same way. Like I shouldn't be the only one who has to make all these changes. I shouldn't be the only one that has to put in all of this work. But whenever you come to understand how the woman sets the tone for the relationship, you realize this is really the easiest and most fulfilling way. You know, you said that whenever you were learning the skills in your books, you mentioned that you kept trying to do it another way, but it never ended up working. It was not worth the price of admission. So, I mean, why keep going against the current and fighting for something that doesn't work anyway?
Yeah. Yeah. It just ends up being more practical. This ends up being the easy way over time, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But that accountability, it takes something. It takes something. You seem very naturally accountable. It seems like you said, you've done a lot of self-help studying before. So I think I see just a lot of accountability on you. And I'm sure that helped you in bringing that forth in your marriage. So yeah, how did he respond, like, to all these changes that you made?
Well, he just really stepped into the role that I had envisioned for him, to being a loving man, kind, compassionate, which he's not compassionate in a woman type of way, but I see how he's compassionate now in his way.
What does that look like? How does that?
It looks like for men, a lot of it is doing things for other people. Like she's tired or she's sad, and I need to comfort her by making her some tea, you know, or for him, it's making her pizza. He's a good pizza maker. He's like, I must comfort my wife with pizza, you know.
That's cute.
Yeah.
So sometimes his actions are speaking louder than his words so the tenderness comes through in those sweet actions.
Yeah, being our hero.
Wow, beautiful. So what is your tip? So for a woman who's listening, whose husband is harsh and maybe fighting with her, she's got a blended family like you do, and she has this dream of creating the kind of family you're describing where they tell each other they love, I love you before your daughter goes off to be with her dad, and he becomes more tender. Where should she start? What should she do?
I definitely think in an instant like that, self-care is important. Anytime children are involved, you have that motherly instinct where you put yourself last. So that would definitely be a big one, to have the emotional reserves that you need for all this work that you have to do. But then SFPs worked really well for me. The SFPs, if you see the best in me, I love how tender, caring, how considerate that you are toward the kids. That really, it gets through to them a lot. It makes them want to be that kind of person.
And then how did you deal with that? It must have just felt like a straight up lie when you first started saying it, or did it?
Mm-hmm. I would at least wait until I had one shred of evidence. And it could be the tiniest shred, like he made pizza. And I'd say, it's so loving that you make food for us, and like her in particular, like how much care that was for the family. And then I would just kind of gather a little bit more evidence throughout the day. Because it's not even in the beginning waiting for them to exhibit the behavior. It's training yourself to see the behavior that's already there and then amplifying that.
That is a great distinction. So it's not meant as a manipulation to get him to behave a certain way. It's for you to choose more carefully what you're focusing on instead of just defaulting to focusing on the negative. Is that right?
Yeah, because I actually started out, before I even spoke SFPs to him, I started out writing them in a journal, because that was training my mind every morning that these are the things that I want to focus on, and these are the things that I want to enhance in our family. And then it took a little bit of patience. It didn't take too long that I was able to see the evidence and then start amplifying it with gratitudes and appreciation.
Yeah, it must have been kind of shocking when you first started to see him actually living up to those SFPs, those self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it definitely feels like magic. Women use that phrase a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. And what would you say to Tiffany from before? Like, And I don't know when you want to go back to, because I really hear there's some pain about your first marriage, even that no one had given you the skills.
Mm-hmm.
So what would you say to Tiffany from before that you know now?
Yeah, I realized that the breakdown of my first marriage and a big part of what was breaking down my second was I was afraid. I was afraid mostly in my second marriage, but it was a lack of gratitude too in my first marriage and my second one. It's so heartbreaking to realize that I tore something down because I was only focusing on the bad. And I couldn't be pleased. I couldn't be pleased. My first husband was a wonderful man, but I was making him cry. I made him cry because all I could focus on was what he was doing wrong and how he was messing up. And then I realized in my second marriage, that's what created so much tension and why I felt like my husband didn't want to please me anymore because he felt like he couldn't because I was just focusing on what he was doing wrong. So that would be my biggest advice for myself in the past. Even if I could go back to save my first marriage, I would be like, you've got to see the good in people. You've got to be grateful. You've got to see what he's doing to show you that he loves you and to show your daughter that he loves you or that he loves her. Because that appreciation, it triggers their hero gene in a way. Like it brings out so much good in them.
Your accountability is just astounding, Tiffany. I really appreciate hearing that. I think it really takes a lot of, it's very brave to look back at a first marriage and take accountability for your part in that breaking down. And and I just hear your sadness and your conviction about it. It's so, I remember being so surprised by this, but it's very attractive. It's very appealing. Like it just makes me want to, I don't know, hug you, hang out with you, right? Just feel connected to you. And it just seems ironic in some ways that kind of a realization is actually more appealing than not ever admitting something like that, right? Mm-hmm. Not ever coming to that awareness. So I think it's really beautiful. So for the woman who's listening who has that blended marriage and just is kind of wondering if she can ever have a peaceful home, you're that beacon of hope for her that it's possible. Your home is peaceful now. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely possible. Yeah, and your ability to influence it is more than you'll ever realize.
It's kind of staggering, isn't it, to see how much power you have. And that's what you're in touch with now, is your tremendous power.
Mm-hmm. Being stuck between them and so many fights for so long, it does feel hopeless. But I love the name of your book, Empowered Wife, because it is so empowering whenever you realize how much strength that you have to change the culture in your family.
Well, your story of how you changed the culture in your family is really wonderful and heartwarming. So thank you, especially for you to be an introvert and to come and share all this personal details with us is very, very inspiring. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura.
If you're wondering how to get started with fixing your relationship and making it shiny again, then you need a roadmap. Get 6 simple steps to follow that will set your relationship up for success. Discover 3 common mistakes that wives make trying to fix their relationship that just make things worse when you download my free Adored Wife Roadmap. You can do that at getcherished.com. Go to getcherished.com now to get your roadmap in minutes. And now it's time for the Worst Relationship Advice of the Week Award.
It's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice. Yeah, it's the worst relationship advice of the worst relationship advice of the week.
And the advice that's sickening me this week was sent in by a student, which I love. So thank you for sending this in. You know who you are, and I know who you are, but no one else knows who you are because we're big on privacy on our campus. But I love for you to get credit for contributing to the podcast. So this is your shout out. Yay! This advice is from a top divorce attorney who recommends that couples spell out the basics of their relationship in a yearly contract. She calls this the terms of endearment. Well, that's pretty cute. That's cute. Terms of endearment. She says that marriage is like any other contract. Its terms and conditions must be reviewed and updated. And the student who sent this in also wrote, the reason I find this incredibly terrible advice is because if a contract would save my marriage, wouldn't my marriage license do the same? She makes a great point, huh? So the subtext of this suggestion is that if you just get it all in writing, that somehow, some way, that's going to make your husband rush toward you and swoop you up in his arms when he sees you because he loves you so much. And then you'll be smiling at each other, just enjoying the connection and maybe sharing your hopes and dreams at a deep level, all because you got it hammered out. You put it in the contract. He should initiate sex this much. You're responsible for giving him praise that much. He'll stop using the credit card that has the lousy rewards program and start using the one with the good rewards program. And you'll cut back on buying new purses. If you figured everything out and you both signed this agreement and followed it, then that's what would happen, right? Of course not. What a great example of applying what works in business to your marriage when the goals are so different. I want my husband to want to hug and kiss me, not because he's contractually bound, but because he thinks I'm just the most lovable, warm, soft thing on the planet. Now, to get that response from him, all I have to do is be the most lovable, warm, soft thing on the planet, which it turns out is a pretty fun way to be once I learned how to do it, once I learned how to choose my focus. But the minute I get into scorekeeping and focusing on which thing he's not doing, that undertow of criticism makes me so much less appealing to him and to me, if I'm honest. If I show up with trust that the man who stood at the altar with me and said, I do, in front of God and everybody, wants to love me, that's exactly what he does. It's not about giving to get. It's about getting so much I want to give. And we would never have gotten there if I had followed this truly terrible idea. And for that reason, the advice that couples should have a yearly contract with the terms of their marriage is the very worst relationship advice I've heard all week. Listen and subscribe to the Empowered Wife podcast. Next week, we'll talk about how to make your husband love you again. In the meantime, I hope you're having lots of fun. Today's fun fact is actually not so fun. Every 13 seconds in the United States, a couple gets divorced. I've got to find that couple and stop them.